I'm going to take you on another lure historical journey. It goes back again to my very early career. Most crankbaits back in the 70s, in my bass club days, in the late 60s, we thought of baits like the bomber, like the hellbenders, and all of a sudden in 74, 75, when I joined the national tour of BASS, I started hearing about a lure called a squarebill. And Bobby Murray and Roland Martin were getting them from locals who had hand carved them. And they were carved out of balsa, they were carved out of cedar. But back then I didn't have a lot of money. These things back then even cost 50 to 70 bucks a piece. These are hand wooden carved baits. I was fortunate enough, though, in 75, I believe, to draw a man named Fred Young. I was fishing Bugs Island in Virginia. And that morning, I think it was like the second morning of the tournament, we were sitting in the boat, and he says, "I'd like for you to have a couple of my hand-carved Big O's." And he handed me two of these. Fortunately, I still have one of them. This is one of the original Big O's. And the neat thing about them is that, I knew they were expensive. I didn't really know how to fish them. And I hadn't been doing too well in the tournament, so about halfway through the day, I just feeling kind of trying to be polite, because Fred was probably in his 60s at that point in time. I said, I tied one on and I started fishing it. And just throwing it out like you would a hellbender or something, just slowly reeling it back in. And it's like I said, all those hand-carved ones were big baits. And about 10, 12 casts, all of a sudden Fred said, "Son, you want me to show you how to fish that bait?" And I'd heard so much about the bait, I didn't take it personal, because, I felt like, I was at the pompous age where I thought I knew it all. I said, "Sure." And he hadn't stood up all day, and he finally stands up. And he picks up the rod. He had one of these Big O's tied on. And he puts it down to his side, puts the tip of the rod on the water, and then he starts to reel that handle faster and turn it than I've ever seen anybody turn a casting reel handle. And I just went, really? And he made about 3 or 4 casts, put it down, and he said, "I know it looks crazy, but let me just tell you," he says, "if you work it that way, you'll get more strikes and you'll catch bigger fish." And I'm going to go through a bunch of these square bills, but if you don't remember anything that I say the rest of this day or time, remember that, because it makes a big difference, especially on the original square bills. The original ones were all this size. Nowadays you see a lot of them in the different sizes, and most fishermen prefer the smaller ones. That's just the nature of bass fishermen. But and again, but they were hard to get. I only had 2. Bobby Murray would get some in Arkansas, but they would cost 50, 60 bucks. So they really never got popular with the masses. But a few of the American hardbait companies like Cordell and like Norman Lures try to bring their own version of it in plastic. And for some reason, and I learned a little bit later what it was, you could not get the same performance out of a plastic one that you could get out of a wooden one. And I fell in love with the wooden ones. They were handmade, they were carved, they were works of art in some cases. And I eventually Bagley Lures started making a balsa version of it, and it mimicked more closely these hand-carved baits than any ones, and it was priced at a price that the average guy could afford. And these were called the balsa bees. And I started fishing these. And actually, I ended up winning in 1991 a BASS tournament on Truman Lake on the balsa bee. Then eventually, I won this trophy at Beaver Lake in Arkansas FLW event on this bait. Right after that, I went to Mississippi River and placed second on this bait. So this became a real key bait for my tournament career because it was a winner. It caught the right size fish. But there were some flaws with the wooden baits, including the Bagley. The flaw in the first ones were they were hard to get and they were expensive. The flaws in the Bagleys was that no two are exactly alike because they're made out of wood, and all wood is different densities, and plus they weren't very durable. Lynn Reeves with Bass Pro Shop approached me in early 90s, and he said, Rick, would you be willing to make us a square bill just exclusively for Bass Pro Shop? And we've got a Japanese company that can do it for you. And I actually kind of said, well, we've never had much success duplicating wood with plastic. He said, well, give them a chance. So I did. And this Lucky Craft produced the finest square bill that's ever been made, even to this day. And they did it in plastic. So now it was still kind of expensive though. It was around $17. But it was very durable, and every one of them was exactly alike. So that really became my key bait. Over time, we started making smaller versions of it. And the original ones were all in that 3.5, 3-inch Bagley Balsa Bead 3 range. And we started making, smaller versions of it. Here I'm going to bring up a little history of, this is something that amazes me. If I ask this question of you, what was the first bass tournament ever won on a square bill? Most of you will say Kevin Van Dam in New Orleans, which was way past. Tommy Martin actually won the first Bassmaster Classic on a square bill at Joe Wheeler Lake in 1974. I won the Bassmaster Classic at Guntersville on a little Bagley Balsa B square bill. 22 of my 27 fish came on this little Balsa B in 1976. Strangely enough, off the same bridges that Hank Cherry won this year's Classic on. But still, a lot of people, that surprises a lot of individuals that the square bill goes that far back into time. Actually, my biggest catch in my history, I didn't win it, but it was in it was the Lake Falcon, where I had I had 105 pounds on a square bill. Now this was a smaller version, this was 1.5. That bait became the most popular selling bait in the country. Obviously after that, a lot of people started copying it and bring it in at a cheaper price, which they were good. I even brought one in with Lucky Strike, not Lucky Craft, that was more affordable. They're very good, but they still did not have the perfection of the original Lucky Craft. And that's when I learned how important tolerances was to getting any crankbait working correctly. The Japanese could just, I hate to admit it, but could just do it better than we could. And so that's kind of the history of square bills, and it goes back a whole lot further than most people think. Next in the Rick Clunn square bill is just what we call the RC King Kong Shad. It's a huge, it's big, much bigger than any of the other square bills we've had in the past. A company out of Japan's making them for me because it requires incredibly tight tolerances to get it right. And it's called Ichikawa Fishing out of Japan. You might ought to try it, but more important than anything, remember what Fred Young said, reel it as fast as you can.